witches, how you doing today? We're back with another video. For those of you who are new here, my name is Taya, and today we're going to talk about foraging basics. It's a video by request. And for those of you who are returning viewers, maybe coming in from another video, thank you so much for coming back. Everybody, please consider subscribing. It's a great way to help us build the channel. So, foraging basics. How do you do it? Where do you find stuff? What do you take with you to do some foraging? What do you do with it after you've got it? We're here to answer some questions. So anyone can forage locally to fill up their apothecary, if you will. But when we talk about foraging, I think a lot of times we think about lush forested landscapes, maybe out in the mountains somewhere, and we're like foraging around in all of this foliage and finding cool stuff out in the middle of nowhere. Absolutely, that is something you can do. But what a lot of people tend to overlook is urban foraging, and that's really what I do. And I'm here to give you some tips on is urban foraging. So basically, you can forage anywhere there's a bit of dirt that plants will grow. You see it all the time. You're walking down the sidewalk and there's little plants shooting up out of the cracks of the sidewalk. You can go to like in your local suburban green spaces and walkways, right? Like there's like local, you know, in housing developments, and there's like a park for the kids and there's a green space around. On municipal roadways, very often it's landscaped and there's all sorts of different bushes. I know here in Edmonton, Alberta, a lot of lilacs and a lot of ornamental roses. Where else can you go? Yard overhangs. So when you're walking along those community pathways and stuff, you'll have, you know, sticking out of the fences and coming over the tops of the fences. You'll have people's, you know, overflow from their yards. Where we walk the dog, there is, you kind of walk around the back. You're walking along the back of people's houses. And there's this one house, and it's, I mean, just an entire fence of raspberry bushes, and they're literally falling over into the public walkway. I forage those all the time. Where else can you go? Local parks. Here in Edmonton, we have a river valley. There's some great, beautiful, big parks here in the city where you can go, and a lot of cities are like that. And anywhere where you're going through a common area and there's planters, you'll find all sorts of different flowers and things that are planted there. My tip for those, if anybody is like, what are you doing? Oh, I was just deadheading. That's where I get my geraniums all the time, from the planters outside the front of my mom's condo building. They have tons of like just planters full of geraniums, and I'll just go through and pick, you know, one here, one there, you name it. So one rule of thumb, you never want to take all of something, and you never want to take the last of something. Okay, so if you see a plant and you're like, oh yes, I want that, absolutely take some, but don't take all of it, and never take the last. If there's only one bloom left on that plant, leave it. Okay, and always say thank you for anything that you take. Some people like to leave offerings, some people just like to say a heartfelt thank you, some people just like to, you know, have an attitude of gratitude, however you want to do it, but it's usually good to acknowledge those, right, the local land spirits, and just to say thank you for their bounty. So, one little trick you need is identifying your local flora. You need to know what is actually growing in your local area. So, first do a little bit of research. What grows native to your area? Right? What type of plants, what type of weeds are you typically going to find out and about? You can do that research on the internet. You can do, typically a good place to go is if you've got a local university or like post-secondary education facility. There's usually people there who have done that sort of research about plants and things that are native to your area. You can usually buy guidebooks that will help you out with that. And there are some excellent apps out there for identification. There's not one in particular that I can recommend, but yeah, you can get apps where, you know, you snap a picture and it'll tell you what something is. Now, are they always right? No. So here is a very important note for when you're out foraging. Never, never, never ingest something if you are not 1000% sure what it is. Number two, if you find it on a busy roadway, I wouldn't recommend it for ingestion. Think about all of the exhaust pollution that is surrounding those plants at all times. And third, you also want to be cautious if it's in an area that has heavy pesticide spray or chemical fertilizers. So if it's that lush green, perfect urban park, chances are they use pesticide or weed spray. Again, you might not want to ingest it. So typically what I do is if I am ingesting anything, I purchase it from a reputable seller. I don't use things that are foraged unless they are foraged from my own yard. I don't ingest. The foraged herbs I find, I use them for spell work predominantly, is really what I have them for, is for my spell work. I don't think that a little bit of car pollution is going to offset their magical properties, but I might not recommend it for ingesting in high quantities. So, you can also forage for more than just herbs and plants. You can forage, you can find feathers, you can find rocks and stones, cobwebs, fur, bones, mushrooms, bugs, you name it. You just have to keep an eye open. And that is really, I think, my biggest tip, because we all walk through our urban landscapes all the time. I used to walk my dog all the time out here, and I just didn't pay attention. Now, I walk and I'm very mindful about looking for stuff. And it's insane what you can find out and about. You just have to be mindful about looking for it. And I would suggest always be looking for it, right? You never know when you're going to be going to the bank and there's going to be a planter out front that has something in it where you're like, oh, I've been looking for that, right? Again, don't take it if it's the only one, and don't take it if it's like the last one. Don't take all of it, but you can take one flower. So yeah, walk and be mindful and be creative. Anywhere you can find trees, grass, shrubs, flowers, you can be foraging. Now, another tip, if you can't find it, you can grow it. Even if you live in a condo or an apartment building, right? Even if you don't have a balcony, you can still grow stuff. If you really want dandelion and you can't find any, grow yourself some dandelions, right? You can do that. So, another thing about a lot of what you're going to find in your local foraging is that it isn't going to have a reference in your magical herb dictionary, right? It's not going to be your typical, right? You're probably not going to find mugwort and sage and wormwood. You're going to find, more off the beaten path type of, and more typical weeds and plants. So you have to kind of get comfortable making your own correspondences. So an example I gave when I did my apothecary video was vetch. It's just a common weed. It's got beautiful purple flowers on it that I dried and put into my apothecary cabinet. And it grows on a vine. And this vine has these little offshoots that just cling onto everything. So to me, that brings in a correspondence, right? Look at where is it growing in a watery area? Is it growing in a forested area that, suggests earthy or watery? Is it something that's very airy and going to blow away like a poof of dandelion seeds that's very air-based? Right? So again, you can sort of you're going to have to bring in your own correspondences to build that, but you need to exercise your intuition a little bit for that. Now, I want to show you my foraging bag. I sewed this myself because I couldn't find one that I liked. Because I wanted a nice long handle. It just scoops over my shoulder and hangs down just between my hip and my knee. And what do I keep in this puppy here? So first and most importantly, I have got a baggie with more bags in it. It's got more baggies in it, and it's also got larger, like, produce type bags. They come in very handy when you're out foraging. So I always keep lots of bags, and I reuse them. What else do I have in here? Oh, I've got dog poop bags because I usually have my dog with me. I have got a little notebook. Now I do have a pencil, but I don't typically tend to write in it. What I use it for is if I find a leaf that I want to add to one of my books, or I find a flower that I want to press, or I find a feather that I don't want to get ruffled, I stick it between the pages of my book and bring things home safely that way. So that's what I use the book for. And I have a camping kit knife, a Swiss Army knife. So again, if I ever need to cut something, oh, it's dirty. If I ever need to cut something, I've always got a good knife on me. And those are kind of the basics in my foraging bag. Bags is the big one. I actually need to add some more. I usually have about 5 of the small Ziploc bags and about 5 of the bigger produce type bags. You know, I was just out the other day. I was over where we have 3 ponds in my local suburban neighborhood. I found a bird wing at one of them, and it was like all decomposed. It was just a wing with some broken bones sticking out of it, and I just used one of those bags to scoop it up and bring it home, and I've got like a whole entire bird wing. It's like insane, and I just found it like out in my neighborhood. It wasn't anything special, like anywhere special, you know? So you can really find some good stuff. You gotta be looking for it, right? It was kind of at the top of a hill under a tree, and I saw something kind of catch my eye, and I thought, that looks like an interesting shape. I'm gonna go see what that is. And sure enough, it was an entire bird wing. I thought my son was probably gonna die of embarrassment because mom's picking up the local dead bird, but you know what? It was just a wing. It's just feathers and bones. So hey, there we go. I got something new to add to my stash. So you've been creative, you've kept your eyes open, you've got a few plants and herbs now that you're starting to add to your collection. What do you do when you bring them home? There's a few different ways to go about it depending on what you're working with. So typically, if it's like just a flower or something, I'm gonna put it in a bundle, I'm gonna tie it up, and then I have like over my kitchen sink, there's like cabinets on either side, and then I've just tacked a string between the 2 cabinets, and then I just tie the bundles to the string, and they just hang in the window and dry. It's a very like classic way of doing it. Another option is to take a cooling rack, like, you know, that you would put cookies on when you're done, and it's kind of like, it's almost like a mesh, and you can lay your things on there because then they'll get air from underneath and air from the top. So that's a good way to dry them. Some things you are going to want to dry in the oven. So things that are woodier, heavier, or thicker, especially mushrooms, you are going to want to dry them in a stove. I usually put them on a cooling rack, put them in the stove at about 200 degrees, and I just leave them there until they're good and crispy dry. The reason with mushrooms specifically is they will get little, I don't know, maybe it's just local here, but they get little worms. If you leave them on your counter, all of a sudden there's these little grubby worms all over the place, like teeny little worms. So dry them in the oven. Same thing like berries, right? Berries are thick and juicy. Dry them out in your oven. I would not put flower petals in your oven because oftentimes they'll stick to whatever they're on. They almost, because they're so fine, 200 degrees is too hot for them. So petals, that kind of stuff, leave it on your counter to dry. Flower heads, like if you have like a whole head of like an ornamental rose or a peony or something, those nice big, you know, beautiful flower heads, I dry those in the oven because I find they dry more thoroughly and more quickly. What you're trying to do is get it dried out before it can mold. Another way you can do it is if you have a food dehydrator. I don't have one, so I use my oven, but you can also use a food dehydrator for drying out your things that you've brought home. So then finally what I do is I put them in a jar, I label it, and I let the jar sit open for about 2 more weeks just to make sure there is no moisture in there. Because if there's any moisture, it will mold. And then when you come to use it a couple months later and you open the jar and it's just a poof of mold will come at the top. I've had it happen a couple times, so you don't want to do that. So that is kind of my quick and dirty on foraging, how you do it, what you do with stuff when you get it home. If you have questions, leave them in the comments. But do you forage? Do you got any hot tips for us? Leave it in the comments. And otherwise, yeah, I'll check you in the next video. Mwah! Thanks so much, you guys.